He was alone in his dressing room, with the soft sound of applause still coming through the door. But in his heart, he felt something else, a deep, empty ache. Ringo Starr had just turned 85 a few hours previously, surrounded by birthday candles and decades of loving plaudits. But the enchantment of that moment disappeared as soon as he read the lines on the official notice from Apple Corps. The Beatles' hologram world tour, which is coming up soon and is supposed to honor the band's long-lasting legacy, would continue on without him. Digital recreations of his live drumming, his distinctive voice, and even his personal thoughts on air would take their place. These would be based on old recordings and generated samples. In one painful stroke, the last living Beatle learned that he was no longer a part of the story he had helped write. He thought about the message again. Unfortunately, for the sake of technical consistency and logistical efficiency, we can only use holographic likenesses and archival audio sources. We are really grateful for everything you have done for us over the years. There was no mention of the nights he passed out on stage from fever, or the countless hours he spent perfecting that strange rhythm that became the heartbeat of songs like Ticket to Ride and Come Together. There was also no mention of the many times his patients kept a band together when their friendship was on the verge of falling apart. It seemed like the organization, which was based on his legacy, thought Ringo was too human and unpredictable to be a part of this big celebration. Memories came rushing back, the first time he picked up a drumstick in a manufacturing basement and pounded a metal cabinet with a cotton bobbin mallet just to hear the echo. That was the start of a career of invention. The loud nights in Hamburg, where the Beatles worked on their sound under neon signs in the red light district, keeping themselves up with a mix of caffeine and adrenaline. When he first came onto Abbey Road as an official Beatle, half the crowd chanted "Pete forever, Ringo never." Those were the tests that made the drummer who would one day lead the most important band in history. But none of that seemed to matter now. To the promoters and the laser-lit stages they imagined, he was just a thing, not an artist. He could feel his heart racing, and each beat reminded him of the blood, sweat, and tears that had gone into every strike on the snare drum and crash on the cymbals. He got over his stage anxiety, dealt with the pranks his bandmates played on him, and almost died from sicknesses that struck him down. All of these things were part of a story that everyone shared. But in this sterile memo, his body of work was boiled down to file formats and data points. It was a betrayal that ruined every peace and love speech he had given from coast to coast, every time he had to stop in the middle of a toast to wipe away tears for his dead pals. But after the immediate shock wore off, he realized that this wasn't just a personal insult. It was a good example of how we treat pioneers when the world moves on to newer things. When new technologies come along, the people who made history risk becoming ghosts in their own story. If holograms could do the job, why compensate the person who came up with the idea in the first place? And if Apple Corps adopted that premise, what would stop other organizations from drafting entire lineups of digital stand-ins for icons judged too fragile for the demands of live performance? He was aware that he had an option. He could give in to the corporate machine, sign the disclaimer they provided with the notice, and let them change his story. He could also fight. And opposing him meant coming out from behind the shadows of his friends Lennon, McCartney, and Harrison, who would never require protection from the public again. He could have broken up the Beatles brand by refusing to give in, but giving in seemed like signing his own death notice. He took a deep breath and stood up. Every time he looked in the mirror in his dressing room, he was reminded that 75 years of sunlight and stadium lights had only made his spirit shine brighter. He ran his fingertips over the worn grooves in the wooden snare drum that was nearby. It was an old friend that was as reliable as the heartbeat it echoed. He remembered how music saved him from being alone in a tuberculosis ward, how each drumming kept him steady in the midst of the pandemonium of bombed-out Liverpool streets, and how his off-kilter approach converted mistakes into song and gave the band its characteristic groove. A stagehand knocked softly on the door somewhere backstage. They had come to tell him that he only had 10 minutes left to receive the press and talk to guests. If he walked out with the same grace he had shown through every tragedy and reconciliation, the world would realize that he knew more than he let on. But deep inside, he knew that every silent heartbeat that followed him over that line would be heavy. He straightened his collar, fixed his cufflinks, and put on a serene face. His mind was racing with memories of John's teasing grin when they first played together in a small cellar, George's shy approval the first time he nailed a hard fill, and Paul's cheeky thumbs up as they walked onto the Ed Sullivan stage, where 4,000 screaming girls almost tore each other apart just to see him. Ringo Starr, the youngster from Madron Street, had always been the underdog. He was afraid he would be replaced and that he wasn't good enough. But time and time again, he showed that he belonged, even when the chances were against him. He let the stress leave his shoulders as he slowly breathed out. People all around the world would soon meet him with smiles and praise, not knowing of the fury that was brewing behind those blue eyes. But storms can change the way things look, making new routes through solid earth. Ringo, more than anyone else, knew how one beat could change the whole song. He stepped past the velvet ropes and into a sea of cameras, microphones, and flashing lights. Reporters pushed and shoved to get a good view of him, all wanting to catch every word and motion he made. He felt like a relic under glass, revered and studied but no longer seen as a real, breathing artist. He was pinned between stage pillars covered in Beatles paraphernalia. The flashbulbs made a staccato rhythm that went with the drum beats he used to play, but they also showed how weak he was. With his heart in his throat, he gave the practiced half-smile that admirers had seen for years. People nicknamed him the Beatles' heartbeat, but today that very heartbeat seemed to be in danger. He raised an eyebrow when someone yelled, "Ringo, will you support the hologram tour?" He stopped for a moment to think about loyalty and the emptiness of a practiced presentation. He cleared his throat and said the words in a calm but strong way. "I like the innovative idea of presenting the Beatles' music to new people, but I won't just sit back and let myself be erased. The spirit of our music is in the hands that played it, the laughs we had backstage, and the moments that no machine can copy." Murmurs spread around the room. The cameras clicked quicker. He noticed the segment producer look at her notes to get the next soundbite. He put his shoulders back. This wasn't about technology taking over art, it was about respecting art and people. A reporter pushed on, their voice getting louder. "Are you threatening to take legal action?" He allowed a small smile curl at the edges of his lips. "Yes, if that's what it takes to protect the truth. But this isn't only a legal issue. It's a battle for being real. It's my story as much as it is everyone else's who has ever loved our music." He looked out at the crowd, letting each electrifying gaze rest on him. This was not just a press conference, it was a statement. Afterward, he went backstage, where the clamor of inquiries followed him like echoes in a hall of mirrors. Melody, his longtime aide, received him with a nod of understanding and a tablet full with fan letters. "Thousands have written in," she said softly, holding up one that said, "Ringo, you are the real deal. Don't let them turn you into pixels." Another voice said, "We need you live on stage, not stuck in a loop of pre-recorded holograms." These words stirred something deep inside him. They weren't asking for a recreation, they wanted the real man who put his passion into his work. He sat down in a worn leather chair in the stillness of his dressing room and watched the recording on a little screen. His own words rang out clear and strong, bouncing from the walls of the room. Outside, he could hear the distant thrum of the tour's hologram trailer bragging about sold-out gigs in London, Tokyo, and New York. It was strange that the band he helped start was being broken up into light beams and motion capture data. It was amazing, but it felt empty without the real-life drummer who constructed the rhythm section from the ground up. He clenched his jaw and picked up the phone. His first call was to his lawyer, Harrison Cole, who had dealt with everything from trademark problems to complicated recording rights. He said, "We need to move quickly. I want an injunction that stops them from doing anything until we agree on terms. And I want protections in place to make sure my performance, or at least my direct involvement, stays important." Cole's voice crackled with agreement on the other end. Plans were made to meet with Apple Corps executives, people from the Lennon and Harrison estates, and the technical directors of the tour. After that, he called Olivia Harrison. George's widow has always been a loyal friend who understood how hard it is to balance a legacy with making a living. After 2 rings, Olivia picked up. He gave her the news, how the world celebrating their common past could make it seem like the 2 friends who had died were no longer there, replaced by soulless simulations. He continued in a quiet voice, "They'll be lighting up your late husband's guitar solos, but he won't be there. And that's not right." Olivia's pause was heavy with the weight of decades spent protecting George's memory. She said she would help and offered to get in touch with Yoko Ono and the John Lennon estate. Together, they would form a united front, three voices protecting the Beatles' core against a flood of digital overreach. He was back on stage for a short soundcheck by late afternoon, banging on the drums with all the skill and style that once shook stadiums. The sound of the cymbals crashing sounded like a promise that he would struggle to keep the genuine heartbeat alive, in gear, on stage, and in flesh and blood. Fans who could see through the backstage curtain stomped their feet and cheered. In that roar, he heard the echo of millions who wouldn't accept a fake tribute. As the sun set behind the arena, coloring the sky in shades of orange and purple, Ringo Starr gazed down at his hands. These were the hands that had grabbed sticks and started a cultural revolution. That human touch couldn't be replaced by a hologram or a bunch of ones and zeros. He stood up, knowing that tomorrow he would have to deal with more talks, more headlines, and the possibility of corporate stagnation. But for tonight, the real Beatle walked off stage as himself, alive, defiant, and determined to make sure the world remembered who kept the beat. He met with his closest friends in a dimly lit boardroom: Harrison Cole, his sharp-suited lawyer; Melody, his loyal assistant; and Maeve Johnson, a veteran music industry strategist. There were contracts, hologram design plans, and financial predictions all over the large wood table. While Harrison drew up several legal paths, Maeve stroked her pen carefully. "We need leverage that resonates," she remarked in a quiet voice. "Not just judicial orders, but also what people think." Ringo nodded, his eyes hard. "If fans rise up, Apple Corps will bend. Let's remind them whose names are on the marquee," he said. Their plan was to run a coordinated media campaign, get fans to sign a petition, and offer to work together on the hologram tour itself, but only on his terms. It wasn't aggressive posturing, it was a chance to change how we think about respect for the past while welcoming new ideas. Later that night, Ringo was in his home studio with heavy drapes pulled to keep out the London night. He ran his fingers over the surface of an old drumhead that had been on tour for decades and was scarred. There were pictures on the walls of Liverpool cobblestones, Hamburg neon signs, the Abbey Road crossing, and a recent picture of him cuddling his beloved granddaughter. He let out a breath, knowing that his fight was not only about keeping his tale alive, but also about protecting a touchstone for future generations. He recalls the quiet surprise when he initially heard that the tour would be bigger than him. Now he was making up a story in which technology helped people instead of taking their place. The next morning, the news was full of stories with headlines like "Ringo's Last Stand?" "Beatle Battles Hologram Injustice." He was on a popular talk show when a banner that said "The Drummer's Darkest Hour" greeted him. The host leaned forward with interest. "Ringo, the world loves you, why fight your own legacy?" Ringo gave a calm laugh. "Legacy isn't about looking back. It's the truth. My friends and I made history together. You lose the heartbeat if you play the record without the record keeper." He laid out his plan: live shows with holograms of John and George, with Paul and him switching off between real-time and holographic appearances to create a real, mixed experience. The audience applauded, some on their feet. At that point, he took back the spotlight. Maeve put together a viral petition called "Keep Ringo Alive on Stage, Behind the Scenes." Within hours, hundreds of thousands of people signed it, explaining how Ringo's drumming had affected their lives. A Brazilian teenager who was a fan said he learned how to play the drums by watching his videos. A Vietnam War veteran said that listening to "With a Little Help from My Friends" helped him get through the pandemonium. These testimonies were more than just numbers, they were emotional bullets directed at the core of corporate indifference. Hashtags on social media become popular. The story was taken up by big news organizations. Ringo's stand had become a cultural flashpoint. At the same time, Apple Corps leaders were busy dealing with a crisis at the company's headquarters. A department that used to manage tour arrangements was flooded with calls from the press and legal notices. They went from being sure of themselves to writing defensive memoranda and making frantic calls to PR firms. The boards were cleared, meetings were pushed back, and as the stress grew, a shocking truth came to light: ticket pre-sales fell without Ringo's support. Even die-hard fans of holograms were hesitant to buy a show that didn't have its original pulse. People who had a stake in the deal started to talk about the details of the deal, and for the first time, Ringo felt like the pendulum was swinging in his favor. On the third day, he went to New York to meet with the estates of John Lennon and George Harrison and Apple Corps executives. The conference room appeared more like a place where people were trying to make a deal than a place where people were talking about music. Portraits of the original four hung on the walls like mute witnesses. People from the legal, creative technology, and public relations fields sat behind long mahogany tables. Ringo was there, but he didn't draw attention to himself. He started with a simple request: include his live performances in the hologram experience and ask him about the rules for authenticity. He stressed that working together, not against each other, would bring the most benefits, both emotionally and financially. Everyone in the room stopped talking. The mood changed after hours of talking about it. A high-level manager leaned in. "Sir, we forgot about the intangible quality you bring. The public wants the genuine Ringo." They suggested a fresh idea, a hybrid show where Ringo played live at the beginning and conclusion of each set, while holographic projections of John and George emerged in between, with him narrating interactive parts. The terms for sharing revenue were changed to reflect his famous status. Ringo felt a sudden surge of pride when the sketches were reworked and signatures were added. He had worked out a deal not just for himself, but for every artist whose work might be threatened by digital copies in the future. He went back to his hotel room that night and called Paul McCartney. "Can you believe it?" he said, his voice full of feeling. Paul's laughing came through the line, and you could tell he was relieved. "You did it, buddy. Beat them at their own game." They talked about the negotiation, then remembered their early days and made jokes to lighten the mood of the struggle. They decided before hanging up that the forthcoming tour would include a reunion video conference at select venues, where they would share memories live with fans. This was something that no hologram could match. As Ringo got ready to walk on stage for his next public appearance, he thought about what was at risk in his fight. It was more than a personal win, it was a turning point in how we recognize living superstars. He knew that technology could do a lot of things, but it shouldn't take away from human creativity. He held the promise that the real soul of music dwells in the spaces between notes, in the human spirit that dares to create, communicate, and not be silent. He woke up before sunrise, full of excitement. When he walked inside his home studio, the London skyline was still a dark outline. The only sound was the quiet click of a metronome. Ringo picked up his drumsticks and tapped the snare, listening for the steady beat that had gotten him through childhood illness, Beatlemania, and now this important moment. He felt the familiar comfort of the sticks against his palms, which reminded him that no hologram algorithm could copy the way he touched things. Later that morning, he met with the creative technology team in a warehouse that had been turned into an office near Shoreditch. There were hologram projectors, motion-captured data streams, and old Beatles instruments on tables. George's Gretsch, John's Rickenbacker, and Paul's Hofner bass were all there. Ringo ran his finger along the dusty guitar bodies before going to the head technician. "Show me how you'll mix my live beat with John and George's holograms," he said. The technician started a sequence in which semi-transparent images of John and George appeared in the air and played "Come Together" together with a floating virtual drum kit that was set up to seem like Ringo's live performance location. He touched a sample synthetic drum, and the sound instantly matched his real snare through a high-tech audio interface. He nodded, impressed with how well everything worked together, but he wanted some changes: elevate George's projection 2 feet higher so there are no shadows, make John's lighting match the Abbey Road look, and change the mix so his live hi-hat cut through without drowning out the synthetic guitars. That afternoon, rehearsals started on a renovated soundstage. As Ringo walked in, the crew quieted down and holographic John and George appeared. He started playing "Ticket to Ride," and the huge speakers made a confident groove that shook the room. He could see the holograms following his every move from the control booth. During one run-through, John's connection faltered for a second, and the illusion was broken. Ringo let the song play out, then spoke into his headphones, "We need smoother transitions, no jumps. It has to feel alive." Technicians rushed to make sure the latency buffers were just right. By nightfall, the sequence played perfectly, and Ringo felt the thrill of being one with the past and present at the same time. That night, he held a little party for his biggest supporters in a small studio next to the main stage. Dozens of longtime fans came in, their faces lit up with excitement. Ringo shook hands with each one and smiled with his blue eyes. He sat on the drum riser and spoke directly to them as they sat on mismatched couches. Tonight, you are the first to see what we've made. Technology is strong, but only when it honors what came before it. We're here to prove that the human spark still drives the music. As John and George's holograms played a short encore of While My Guitar Gently Weeps, the crowd was overwhelmed with wonder. Fans captured their responses on their phones and posted them right away. Seeing Ringo and holographic George live, it's unreal. Their voices spread like wildfire online, making the message louder. True emotion demands a real artist. 2 nights later, the clearing windows for the first hybrid concert opened in Manchester. The promoters were on the verge of a much-needed public relations boost when the tickets sold out in minutes. Ringo got to the soundcheck early and was met with the loud clamor of a throng that had been let into the empty arena for rehearsal. He walked up on the drum riser, his heart beating louder than any amplifier. When he started playing the first notes of Don't Pass Me By, the holograms showed up. John's laser-etched silhouette and George's ghost-like figure traded solos in perfect time. The crowd's spontaneous cheers echoed through the huge hall, and Ringo closed his eyes to enjoy the moment, history in motion. He saw himself in the mirror backstage, an old man with silver hair and a youthful spark lingering in his eyes. He thought about the trip, the sick child who doctors brought back to life, the orphan youngster whose father left him, and the quiet Liverpudlian who ended up at the Cavern Club, then Hamburg, and finally Abbey Road. Each trial had made him a channel for shared happiness, a throbbing heart in a world that needed peace. Now, decades later, he was connecting different eras, making sure that new audiences felt the real heartbeat of the Beatles. He spoke to the arena via the sound system after the last rehearsal. Tomorrow's show is for everyone, from those who were there in the 1960s to those who will see us for the first time in the digital age. Let's celebrate what music can do, bring people together, heal, and inspire. Cheers erupted. The technicians gave each other a fist bump. Melody, his assistant, gave him a cup of tea, and he slowly drank it, letting the warmth ground him. The next morning, he got ready for the press call that would happen before the launch. There were billboards all throughout Manchester that said Beatles Live, past and present, together. People would ask about contracts, holograms, and the band's legacy. But Ringo was ready. He had studied his points, but more importantly, he had rehearsed his truth, that art is born in the hands and hearts of people and goes beyond any one media. He looked at his phone and saw tweets from fans who couldn't imagine a Beatles concert without Ringo playing drums. A hologram can look like George, but only Ringo can make me feel alive. He smiled and put the phone in his jacket pocket. He would keep that vow tonight. He shut the door behind him and walked down the hall. At the end, the stage lights twinkled. He straightened his jacket, fixed his tie, and headed into history, where 2 generations came together in a single heartbeat. Ringo knew that people's opinions had changed by the time he got to Tokyo. 10,000 people came to see the guy, not just a hologram, at Nippon Budokan. As John and George's holograms materialized in perfect rhythm, the drums roared out, giving the stage a sense of reunion. The event was called The Real Deal by reporters, and ticket sales went through the roof in Sydney and New York. He remembered seeing Paul give a thumbs up on tape. The number of people watching the live stream shot up. Fans from Brazil to Germany recorded their emotional reactions, showing that real music must be played by real people. Ringo drank green tea backstage and thought about how far he had come, from being a sick youngster finding rhythm in a basement to being a world-famous performer who shows that humanity still exists. He thought about the youngster whose father left him, the disease that almost killed him, and the drum fills that had rescued him before. He played an unplanned solo, a flourish that no digital map could show. That modest beat was his trademark, a reminder that technology may copy sight and sound, but not soul. The crowd's ovation was like a vow after the act was over, the real heartbeat would always beat any fake one. The synergy was electric from the first crash of the cymbals. He started I Want to Hold Your Hand with a traditional 4-on-the-floor beat, and John's Rickenbacker shone at the same speed while George's riffs lined up perfectly. The audience stood up and swayed between the real and the virtual, showing that a seamless mix could pay homage to the past without feeling like a gimmick. In the middle of A Day in the Life, he took a short breather and let the quiet linger for a moment before diving into the growing orchestral crescendo. At that moment, everyone in the room knew they were part of something historic. A song that had been recorded in bits and pieces in the studio was now back to its complete splendor. As he moved into back in the USSR, he leaned into double-time fills, and the stage lights flickered to make the swagger stand out. At the end of the song, John and George's holograms bowed in a theatrical way, while Ringo smiled back like an old friend. Cameras caught the event, but real applause was louder than any flash. There was a wave that crashed through the arena by the time the act ended with a little help from my friends. The combination of human heartbeats and computer ghosts showed that inventiveness is still strong. After Manchester, word of mouth spread like wildfire. Critics called the hybrid idea a masterstroke and the future of legacy performances. Major news agencies published headlines like "The Beat Goes On, Live and Unfiltered." Fans shared clips and stories and posted answers under hashtag #KeepRingoAlive. Skeptics agreed that the human pulse couldn't be replaced. People argued on blogs and forums about whether other acts could use this formula. Ringo's way of doing things became a model for artists. At the same time, his staff got ready packages for Tokyo, Sydney, and New York. Each package had something special to do with the area, such karaoke portions in Japan, drum lessons in Australia, and street parades in New York's East Village. Ringo and Melody went over each schedule on a private flight to Narita. He liked looking for places to play and picturing new audiences connecting with his drumming. Paul sent him a video cameo with a message of support and a reminder, "Don't overthink the fills, mate." That banter reminded him why he battled so hard, not just for fame, but also for the thrill of playing drums in front of real people. He felt a new feeling of purpose as he closed his tablet. Legacy wasn't etched in stone, it was alive, changing, and continuously developing with each beat. He woke up before dawn, unable to sleep because he was so excited. When he walked inside his home studio, the London skyline was still a dark outline. The only sound was the quiet click of a metronome. Ringo picked up his drumsticks and tapped the snare, listening for the steady heartbeat that had gotten him through childhood sickness, Beatlemania, and now this important moment. He felt the familiar comfort of the sticks against his palms, which reminded him that no hologram algorithm could copy the way he touched things. Later that morning, he met with the creative technology team in a repurposed warehouse close to Shoreditch. There were hologram projectors, motion-captured data streams, and old Beatles instruments on tables. George's Gretsch, John's Rickenbacker, and Paul's Hofner bass were all there. Ringo ran his finger along the dusty guitar bodies before going to the head technician. "Show me how you'll mix my live beat with John and George's holograms," he said. The technician started a sequence in which semi-transparent images of John and George appeared in the air and played "Come Together" together with a floating virtual drum kit that was set up to seem like Ringo's live performance location. When he touched a sample virtual drum, the sound immediately matched his real snare through a complicated audio interface. He nodded in agreement with the smooth integration, but insisted on changes: raise George's projection up 2 feet to get rid of shadows, change John's lighting to fit their Abbey Road style, and change the mix so that his live hi-hat cut through without drowning out the digital guitars. That afternoon, rehearsals started at a soundstage that had been changed. As Ringo walked in, the crew quieted down and holographic John and George appeared. He started playing "Ticket to Ride," and the huge speakers made a confident groove that shook the room. He could see the holograms following his every move from the control booth. During one run-through, John's connection faltered for a second, and the illusion was broken. Ringo let the song play out, then spoke into his headphones, "We need smoother transitions, no jumps. It has to feel alive." Technicians rushed to make latency buffers work better. By nightfall, the sequence played perfectly, and Ringo felt the thrill of being one with the past and the present in real time. 2 weeks after his brilliant premiere in Manchester, he landed in Sydney, where the sails of the Opera House shone like white banners across a sea of possibilities. The place, which was on the port and surrounded by seagulls and loud voices, was full of excitement. Ringo came onto the outside platform, the snare drum shining in the midday sun, and began to sing "Hey Jude" with all his heart. The holograms of John and George appeared against the blue sky, floating into place behind him as supporters waved flags and chanted along to every word. It was an explosive moment between remembrance and newness, and with every cymbal crack, he felt the heartbeat of mankind returning. This moment showed that technology might make life better instead of taking it away. After the show, he met with leaders of local music education groups and used the tour's success to start the Ringo Starr Rhythm Foundation in Australia. He sat at a long table with excited instructors and students and listened to stories of how drumming has changed the lives of young people in remote outback towns. He signed drum pads and gave pointers on how to play with each handshake, inspiring the next generation of beat artists. News cameras caught him promising to pay for scholarships and give away instruments, spreading his promise well beyond the platform. When he got back to his hotel room, he got a lot of emails from Brazil to Bangladesh thanking him for utilizing his fame to help poor youngsters and inspire their creative dreams. When the tour got to Madison Square Garden in New York City, the city that never sleeps became quiet and respectful. Thousands of fans rushed into the venue, holding vinyl records and old posters as they waited for the hybrid experience. When Ringo came in, the crowd cheered so loudly that it felt like a tidal wave. He sat behind his clear drum platform, the light from the smartphone screens rising like stars. As he counted in revolution, John and George's holograms appeared, and their famous riffs cut through the noise. In between songs, he told stories of recording at Strawberry Field and playing in small bars before they became famous. His honest stories reminded people that legends were once real people who lived, laughed, and learned like everyone else. Ringo wrote in a notebook on hotel stationery during the trip. He wrote about meeting fans, drew pictures of stage layouts, and came up with ideas for new enterprises. He wrote on how the analog and digital worlds work together and how each hybrid concert was a conversation between the past and the present. One article talked of a hologram issue that transformed into an interactive moment. John's projection messed up, so Ringo had to come up with a fill that changed the song. The crowd cheered louder for that unplanned honesty than for any well-rehearsed performance. In his last entry, he thought that the experience showed how technology can make music more human when artists who refuse to give up their voices direct it. He closed the book with the belief that he had set a lasting example and motivated many people to do the same. As news of Ringo's victory traveled around the world, a wave of fans and artists came together behind the idea he stood for, that creativity needs people to connect. Every prominent act was challenged by social media to do live shows as well as digital ones, which led to discussions in forums. Ringo's Rhythm Foundation also revealed its first grant beneficiaries in Mexico City and Johannesburg. They gave drum kits and workshop vouchers to young people who didn't have access to them. He made a video promise to his fans around the world, saying, "Music is a bridge, not a barrier. Let's build experiences that honor the past, embrace the future, and keep the human spirit at the center." This statement became a motto for a new era, showing that one person's stand could change industry standards and inspire a generation that wanted to be real. As the last notes of "Here Comes the Sun" faded away at the last gig in New York, Ringo stopped, drumsticks in hand, and took in the sea of faces lighted by